Oh God, it ruined it. 13. Oh God, I hate this.
Something big is happening at Buckingham Palace, and the rumors spread quickly. King Charles has had enough, but what does that really mean? Reports are flying in, hinting at an abdication shaking the royal family to its core, and the palace is in full damage control mode. Could this be the moment that changed everything for King Charles, or is there a deeper twist waiting to be uncovered? Join us as we find out what happens when King Charles resigns. A monarchy shattered, the world froze for a moment on that quiet February morning. Two simple words, "I resign," fell from King Charles's lips and shook the royal family like an earthquake, breaking traditions that had stood for hundreds of years. No one saw it coming, not the royal experts who had followed Charles's life for years, not the British people who had only just started calling him their king, not even the most experienced journalists who usually predicted royal decisions before they happened. The news hit like a lightning strike on a clear day. In over 1,000 years of monarchy, no strong and capable ruler had ever stepped down by choice. Charles had waited longer than anyone in British history to become king, more than 70 years, while his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, led the nation. He had spent his whole life preparing, learning the rules, perfecting royal duties, and planning his time on the throne. Then, just as his reign had begun, he gave it all up. Television screens across the world showed the same moment, Charles standing in front of cameras at Buckingham Palace, looking tired but sure of himself. Inside the palace, chaos broke out. Royal staff, caught completely off guard, rushed to figure out what would happen next. Phone calls between government offices came one after another, filled with urgent questions no one could answer. Carefully planned royal events suddenly meant nothing. On the streets of London, crowds gathered in shock, staring at their phones. Some whispered, some argued, some wiped away tears. Many just stood still, struggling to process what this meant for a country where the monarchy had always been the one steady thing in an ever-changing world. The questions came faster than answers. Was Charles unwell? Was there a hidden crisis? The palace remained silent, offering no explanation beyond the short statement Charles had read. For Prince William, everything changed in an instant. The future he had been preparing for his whole life suddenly arrived without warning. The crown, which he had expected to inherit far in the future, now waited for him immediately. Cameras captured his tense expression as he drove through the palace gates, a man now facing a destiny he thought was decades away. Within an hour, Prime Minister Harris called an emergency cabinet meeting. Experts in royal law were asked to explain a situation no one had ever planned for. The last time a British king had stepped down, Edward VIII in the year 1936, it had been for love, not by choice. The royal family, built on tradition and lifelong duty, now faced its biggest challenge in modern history. It was not because of a scandal or a public uprising, but because of three unexpected words from a king who had decided he had enough. As the palace gates shut after Charles's shocking announcement, it begs the question, what pushed a man who had spent his whole life preparing to be king to finally walk away? Living in his mother's shadow. From the moment Charles took his first breath inside Buckingham Palace, his life was never truly his own. The nurses who placed him in his mother's arms were not just handing over a newborn, they were presenting Britain's future, a child bound by duty from the very start. His childhood was anything but ordinary. While other boys ran through fields, climbed trees, and returned home with scraped knees and dirt-streaked faces, Charles was being taught the art of stillness. From a young age, he stood for hours at royal ceremonies, mastering the ability to remain composed under the watchful eyes of dignitaries and the public. Every step he took, every word he spoke, every gesture he made was carefully molded to reflect the immense responsibility that would one day rest on his shoulders. There was no room for childhood whims or carefree laughter, only discipline, duty, and the ever-present expectations of the monarchy. At school, he was surrounded by boys who lived without the weight of a future throne pressing down on them. They could play rough, speak freely, and express themselves without consequence. But Charles was different. His posture was too straight, his speech too measured, his habits too refined. While his classmates enjoyed the simple joys of youth, he was already being shaped into a ruler. Charles grew up watching Queen Elizabeth II lead with unshakable dedication. For 70 years, she ruled with grace, never showing weakness and never stepping away from duty. To the world, she was the perfect queen. No matter how hard Charles tried, he could never quite live up to the image she left behind. Every move he made, Every choice he took was compared to hers, and he always seemed to come up short. His personal life only added to the struggle. What started as a fairy tale marriage to Diana turned into a very public heartbreak. While she captured the love of the people, he was painted as the villain. The criticism was constant, and the blame never seemed to fade. Even as time passed and the public slowly warmed to him again, the comparisons to Diana never truly went away. When he finally became king at 73, Charles took on a role that had already been mastered by someone else. He gave it everything he had, handling endless responsibilities, signing stacks of documents each day, attending ceremonies, and managing the demands of royal life. But no matter how much effort he put in, he knew one thing would never change. He would always be compared to his mother, and her legacy would always overshadow his own. In the end, it wasn't because he wasn't ready. It was the unbearable pressure of living up to something no one could ever match. The royal family in crisis. As Charles carried the weight of his mother's legacy, his decision did more than unsettle the throne. It sent shockwaves through a family already on fragile ground. A family built on tradition and unity is now divided. Will duty and personal loyalties pull them apart? The morning after King Charles stepped down, the royal residence felt different. The usual sounds of palace life, the quiet footsteps, the polite greetings, the careful routines, were all gone. In their place was a tense silence, broken only by whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Palace staff who had seen decades of royal transitions found this moment unsettling. It was not just quiet, it was the kind of silence that happens when trust between family members disappears. Prince William arrived at dawn, his face unreadable as security cameras caught him stepping out of his car. Minutes later, Catherine joined him. She was always calm in public, but that morning, even she looked shaken. They shut themselves inside the East Wing while royal aides waited nervously outside, stacks of urgent paperwork piling up. The burden that had weighed on his father now landed on William without warning. At 43, he had expected many more years. His life had been carefully planned, balancing royal duties while raising his 3 children. Overnight, that plan was gone. William had worked hard to be a hands-on parent, making time for school events and soccer games, but the crown demanded full attention. His children would now see him more in public than at home. Across the ocean, Prince Harry got the news while having breakfast in California. His phone lit up instantly, not with messages from family, but from reporters looking for a reaction. The physical distance between him and the royal family was already vast. Now, it felt impossible to cross. Harry faced a no-win situation. If he spoke in support of his father, critics would call it insincere. If he stayed silent, they would say he had abandoned his family in a time of crisis. No matter what he did, the headlines would write their own story. The once inseparable brothers now lived in different worlds. William had no choice but to prepare for his new role immediately, canceling all personal plans. Harry, watching from thousands of miles away, said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. On the streets of London, people gathered outside Buckingham Palace. At first, everyone was in shock. Then, opinions split. Some held signs thanking Charles for his honesty, while others carried messages demanding that duty should come before personal choice. For many, the monarchy had always been a symbol of stability. Now, that symbol felt broken. Some saw it as a betrayal, others thought it was a long overdue change. Inside the palace, Queen Camilla moved through the halls quietly, avoiding the press. She had spent decades standing by Charles, enduring criticism and rejection to be with him. Now, with his departure, her role became uncertain. She was no longer just his wife, nor fully queen. She was something in between, something history had never quite defined. Princess Anne, Charles's sister, arrived later in the afternoon by helicopter. She walked past reporters without a word, her face serious. As the only member of the family with military service, she understood duty in a way few others did. Her presence made it clear she was there to support William as the transition began. A monarchy that had lasted for 1,000 years, built on tradition and stability, was suddenly at risk. With its leader stepping away by choice, could it adapt and survive? Or was this the beginning of the end? Modernization or decline? The morning after King Charles stepped down, Britain woke up to a nation forever changed. In the Tower of London, the Golden Crown sat untouched behind bulletproof glass, its jewels shining as they had for centuries. But the monarchy it symbolized had shifted overnight, leaving uncertainty in its place. Inside Windsor Castle, Portraits of kings and queens from the past 1,000 years lined the walls, each ruler a link in an unbroken chain. Now for the first time, that chain had a break, not from war, scandal, or crisis, but by choice. For centuries, the monarchy had rested on one simple belief: duty before self. A king ruled until death, never stepping away. That belief had been shattered. The question was no longer just about who would take the throne, it was whether the throne itself still mattered. In Parliament, urgent discussions took place behind closed doors. The monarchy's role had always been more symbolic than political, but symbols carried weight. If a king could simply walk away, what did that mean for the stability of the institution? Across the country, university lecture halls filled with students questioning whether a system built in medieval times had a place in the modern world. Trust in institutions had already been falling for years. Now, many young people saw this as proof that the monarchy was just another tradition that no longer fit. Even in the middle of the crisis, some people still defended the monarchy. Business leaders said it brought in money from tourism and gave Britain global recognition. Community leaders believed it could help bring people together in a time when the country felt divided. Others argued that the monarchy could still have a place in modern Britain, but only if it was willing to change with the times. At Buckingham Palace, staff worked frantically behind the scenes. For 12 hours, the royal family's social media accounts went silent. Then they reappeared with carefully chosen images of Prince William meeting with the public, a quiet message of continuity. Behind the palace doors, advisors weighed the future. The monarchy had reached a turning point. It could either evolve to fit a changing world or risk becoming a relic of the past. As the monarchy stood at a crossroads between old traditions and necessary change, everyone now focused on one person, the heir who never wanted this moment. How would a man who never thought he would rule so soon shape the meaning of kingship for a new generation? The prince who would be king. Prince William walked through the quiet halls of Kensington Palace like a man lost in a dream. The soft carpet silenced his steps as he passed the portraits of past kings, men who had taken the crown with the certainty that it was their destiny. But none had inherited it like this, through abdication instead of death, by choice instead of fate. For years, his path to the throne had been carefully planned, a slow and steady journey of increasing responsibility. He was meant to have decades to prepare. Instead, everything changed overnight. In the royal nursery, his 3 children felt the shift. Prince George, only 11 years old, now carried a heavier burden. The carefree days of playing football and going to school like any other child were fading. He was no longer just a prince, he was the next in line, a future king whose life had just been set on a faster course. William, who had worked so hard to give his children a childhood as close to normal as possible, now found that effort slipping away. The resignation of his father had changed everything. The careful balance he and Catherine had built was gone, replaced by the unavoidable reality of their new roles. Even his appearance began to change. The casual clothes he once wore disappeared, replaced by formal suits. His way of speaking became more precise, his words carefully chosen. The easy warmth that made him so popular seemed to fade, replaced by a more serious and reserved presence. At his first Privy Council meeting, he sat surrounded by senior officials. His hands shook slightly as he signed the documents confirming the transition. Those in the room noticed his steady focus, his quiet but firm presence. The weight of the crown had not yet rested on his head, but it was already pressing down on him. Across Britain, people reacted in different ways. Some saw William as a sign of hope, a leader who could modernize the monarchy while still respecting its traditions. Others wondered if he had the strength to carry the burden, fearing that the role would change him as it had changed those before him. At Buckingham Palace, William made a small but significant choice. He moved his office, not to the Grand King's workspace, but to a smaller room overlooking the gardens where he had once walked with his mother. He knew what this role had done to his family. His parents' marriage had been torn apart by it. His father had struggled under its demands before finally walking away. And now, much sooner than expected, it was his turn. As he prepared for his first speech to the nation, the question was not whether he could do the job. A lifetime of training had prepared him for that. The real question was whether the job would allow him to remain the man he had always been. With William trying to come to terms with a crown he never expected so soon, the impact of Charles's decision spread far beyond Britain. If even one of its oldest institutions could change so suddenly, what else might follow? The ripple effect in the quiet halls of the United Nations was immediate. Diplomats exchanged uneasy glances. The news from Britain had arrived like an unexpected storm, shaking the foundations of long-established protocols and forcing urgent discussions about the future of diplomacy. King Charles's decision shook governments around the world. In Spain, King Felipe VI cancelled public events and held urgent talks with his advisors. In Sweden, the royal palace said nothing, but the silence itself sent a strong message. In Denmark, Queen Margrethe walked out of an emergency council meeting, her face showing clear concern, something rarely seen from her. The impact stretched far beyond Europe. In China, President Chun ordered a review of the economic impact on trade with Britain. The White House released a careful statement offering support for the British people, but made no mention of the monarchy itself. For Commonwealth nations, the reaction was even stronger. In Australia, Republican groups quickly launched campaigns, arguing that if a king could step away from the throne, countries should be able to step away from the monarchy. In Jamaica, lawmakers called for discussions on whether it was time to remove the British monarch as head of state. Tourist destinations also felt the shift. Thailand's tourism officials worried that fewer British visitors might arrive, as their fascination with their own royal family often extended to others. Japan's Imperial Household Agency increased security, aware that interest in monarchies worldwide had suddenly intensified. Social media fueled the debate. In Brazil, trending topics linked Charles's decision to discussions about colonial history. In Indonesia, royal influencers faced tough questions about their relevance in today's world. Across the globe, people debated what this moment meant, not just for Britain, but for monarchies everywhere. The diplomatic impact was immediate. Charles had played a key role in global environmental efforts, using his influence to unite different viewpoints. Now, climate conference organizers scrambled to fill the gap. Conservation programs in Africa faced uncertainty as royal patronages came into question. Security experts also took notice. Intelligence agencies quietly analyzed whether rival nations might take advantage of Britain's moment of transition. Defense officials re-examined alliances, questioning whether traditional diplomatic ties would remain strong during this period of change. Inside royal palaces from Thailand to Jordan, rulers born into power thought about what this meant. A king had given up his throne, not because of a scandal or a revolution, but by his own choice. The same question ran through royal halls everywhere. If a monarch could simply step down, what was left of the centuries-old tradition that made them different from everyone else? What happens to a king's legacy when his time on the throne becomes just a short pause between rulers who came before and after him? Charles's abbreviated legacy puzzled historians. Curators at the British Museum's Royal Archive worked with unusual urgency, unsure how to categorize items from a reign that ended almost as soon as it began. In an artist's studio, a half-finished portrait of King Charles III sat untouched. The background was carefully painted, but the eyes remained blank, a fitting symbol of a kingship that never had the chance to fully take shape. Charles had spent more than 70 years preparing for the throne, only to step away after a short time. Historians now faced a difficult question: how does one measure the legacy of a king whose greatest ambitions were left unfinished? Inside Windsor Castle, staff quietly packed up personal items from the king's study, books with notes scribbled in the margins, reports on environmental issues marked with handwritten thoughts, and speeches that would never be spoken. Every item held a reminder of plans that would never be finished. At climate summits around the world, empty chairs would be a reminder of the man who had spent years urging leaders to take action. Charles had used his royal position to bring scientists and politicians together, turning ceremony into real change. But with his resignation, that influence disappeared almost instantly. For many, his departure left a sense of confusion. A young girl who had once given Charles flowers during a hospital visit now held a framed photo, unsure how something so recent could already feel like the past. At Westminster Abbey, tourists stopped at his coronation marker, while guides struggled to explain a reign that was over almost as soon as it began. Even historians found it hard to place Charles in the royal timeline. British kings and queens were usually remembered for what they did while ruling, but Charles would be known for the choice to step down. His decision went against centuries of tradition, creating a gap that did not fit easily into history books. Meanwhile, plans for William's coronation moved ahead much sooner than anyone had expected. People inside the palace said he preferred a simpler ceremony, maybe knowing that too much celebration would only make people think about the uncertainty his father's resignation had left behind. Those who saw Charles at his private estate noticed a man who seemed both relieved and deep in thought. As he walked through the gardens of Highgrove, he appeared free, yet unsure. He was someone who had spent his whole life preparing for a role he had decided to give up. In the end, Charles III's time as king might be remembered not for what he did, but for what he proved, that even the oldest traditions cannot stay the same forever. Is this the moment that reshapes the future of the monarchy forever? Or is it the first sign of its inevitable decline? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.